Hello and welcome to the Cap Psych Pod. I'm Kristen Davey, Operations Manager here at Capital Psychological. Today we're joined by Sarah Mackrell. Sarah is our Head Psychometrist. Today, she will be sharing some information on the different types of assessments that we offer, as well as when to tell if you or your child may need an assessment and what to do once the assessment is complete. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today. The first question that I think we should start with is how to tell if you or your child may need an assessment.
So signs that a child might require assessment often depend on the age. So early on, it can often be prompted by family physicians. So, for example, are kids meeting appropriate developmental milestones for things like motor skills, speech? Are they developing expectedly in terms of their social skills for things like eye contact, social play? Once kids are older, and in the daycare and school years, prompting can often be by teachers or daycare providers who may have expressed concern about their behavior or learning skills, especially compared to their peers. And also parent intuition. So are you concerned about something in their development? Are you seeing them struggle more than expected in terms of their development or academic skills? And if you're not sure, talking to a doctor or friends or teachers can be helpful.
Okay, that makes sense. Typically, what age do children need or generally complete an assessment?
So often when we're looking at assessment timing, important transitions in development can help prompt when we might look at when we want to do those. So for example, as I mentioned, starting daycare or elementary school are a big transition for kids. So it's common for kids to have some trouble with that adjustment as they're settling into a new environment or new routine. But thinking about, is their difficulty excessive? So are you seeing a lot of behavioral challenges? Is it causing them a lot of mental health difficulties for a longer period than expected? Are they having a lot of social challenges that, again, are not typical for the usual adjustment trouble that they might have in a new environment? And a big part for that is thinking about where are they developmentally. So is anyone else concerned? Again, as I mentioned, we expect some adjustment difficulty, but is it above and beyond what's typical in terms of the intensity and duration of those challenges? And where are they at relative to their peers? So for example, when we're talking about starting school, you might have a child who's born in December versus a child born in January, and we would expect some developmental variation there in terms of their adjustments. So keeping in mind, is it appropriate for where they're at for their age and where they are relative to their peers? As far as teacher prompting, that's a big one for learning disabilities and attention issues, as those tend to be noticed more in the classroom. So academically around grade 2-3 is usually when we do assessments the first time around for reading, writing, math challenges. Attention issues tend to come out more than as kids are in more structured academic environments, so we can see those troubles more often as there's greater demands on sitting seated, listening to instructions. And for kids who do relatively well in the earlier grades, we often do assessments around that middle school, high school range for kids who now, as there's more demands on attention, skills like planning, organization, homework, increased independence, that tends to be a time where, especially bright kids, they can't really coast by anymore in their intellect. They start to have more demands that require more of those higher order skills than versus just their aptitude for a task. And then the final time for kids is usually that reassessment, often needed for college, university to maintain supports.
Okay, that makes sense. So it really just varies depending on every kid, really.
Yeah, and there's expected transition points where there's shifts in the curriculum, and that can make things more or less difficult for different kids depending on the areas that they struggle with.
Right. Okay. So far the focus has been on children, but adults sometimes also require an assessment. So what are some signs that an adult might want to seek out an assessment?
Yeah, so for adults, typically the main prompt is difficulty in the workplace. So for people finding that they're having a lot of trouble focusing on their job tasks, people who are consistently having trouble meeting workplace deadlines, mental health challenges can also prompt needing an assessment done for adults. So the mental health challenges might be also an issue in the workplace, but often it's prompted by physicians who want a formal diagnosis to help guide pharmacological treatment to see if what's the diagnosis they fit best into for what medications might help, or if there's multiple diagnoses, because that can affect the combination of medications you might need and be important information for a physician. Another type of assessment often done for adults is people who've been in some type of accident. So for example, car accidents, or people who've had some type of injury from like an activity like a concussion. And in that case, someone might need an assessment to formalize support for, again, the workplace or for accessing services through their insurance company.
Okay, perfect. So starting the assessment process can seem like a daunting task for some people. Can you just kind of explain the different types of assessments that there are and how each type of assessment can kind of be helpful?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, psychological assessments are one type of assessment, and that's usually to formalize a mental health diagnosis. That can be used for, as I mentioned, guidance for physicians. It can also be used for guidance for therapists. So if someone's working with a therapist and feels that a formal diagnosis can help guide treatment, that can be useful. Also, this can be used in the workplace if people need accommodations around their condition for support or things like extra time for work or if they need time off, things like that. ADHD assessments are another type of assessment. Again, often those are used for accommodations in school and the workplace, formalizing supports, also for physician guidance for medication if needed. Psychoeducational assessments are used in the education world especially, so school accommodations for things like extra time, access to technology for students, and formalizing supports in the workplace too. If someone might have a long-term academic challenge like reading, you might need accommodations in the workplace for things like technology. Gifted testing is often used just to confirm a student meets criteria for entrance into gifted programming offered through the schools. That tends to be limited. So that's more of a confirming that they meet criteria in that case. For autism assessments, again, you've got providing guidance for parents, teachers, physicians to support the child, for other practitioners who might be involved in care. Assessments are also often required in order to access funding services available. So the assessment can help open up access to different care and services and provide more information for how to best support children and adults. And for neuropsychological assessments, again, guidance for physicians, accessing funding through insurance, workplace, and for children also in the school.
Okay, perfect. Can you tell us about the process of getting a child in for an assessment and just kind of like some general timelines that people can expect?
Yeah, so the first step is calling the main office to see what the wait times are. Unfortunately, there's a lot of demand right now and the wait list can be extensive at a lot of offices right now. So calling the office, get your name on the wait list, see what the expected wait times are, which can vary depending on the time of year and the demand at the time. The next step is to speak with your family doctor and insurance company to check if you have coverage and if you need a doctor referral letter. So we don't need a doctor referral letter for you to access our services, but some insurance companies do require a doctor letter saying that you require an assessment to provide coverage for the process. Once you come up on the wait list, someone from the office will call you to set up an intake meeting. So for parents of children, that meeting is typically done just with parents to review the child's medical history, social, emotional, academic history, and the place of adults, workplace history too, if applicable. After that, we'll book times for you to come into the office to do testing. So all the assessment measures are completed in office for the assessment. And then after that's completed, we will score all the test materials and prepare a draft report. This is written by the psychometrist and the psychologist involved in the assessment. Once that's done, we complete a feedback session where we review any diagnoses and then talk about recommendations. This is the most important part for most people in order to see how to help with their areas of challenge. And then finally, we send you a copy of the report to review, and that's an opportunity to go through it in more detail and ask us any follow-up questions if you have any.
Okay, perfect. And what kind of information is included in the final report that's written?
So the final report involves a review of background history that we get at the intake meeting. The second part of the report is looking at the testing results, so a summary of all the testing completed in office. And then the final most important part is the recommendation section. So the way the report's broken up for that part is it's usually in headings for the areas of difficulty. And in that section, we'll talk about accommodations and recommendations for what can be done to address those challenges. So for students, it could be in class support, so classroom modifications, technology access. It can be referrals for other professionals that might be able to help work with those areas, more specifically like an occupational therapist or a therapist for emotional challenges, and adjustments for evaluations in like the workplace or school setting.
Okay, perfect. And then once the final feedback appointment is completed and parents have the report with all those recommendations, what should they do with it?
The first thing parents should do is contact their child's school and let them know that you have completed an assessment and you have the report, and would like to set up a meeting to review the recommendations and set up an individual education plan. It's also goes by an IEP, which is just a short form. And that's just to formalize supports in the school. So this is basically a condensed document that summarizes any diagnoses, areas of strengths, areas of challenge, and then has in the document required supports for environmental accommodations in the classroom, assessment and accommodations required for tests and exams, and instructional accommodations required by the teacher as far as how they're communicating to your child for their need. Once a feedback appointment is completed, another thing that might be required too is additional paperwork. So this depends on the case. For the majority of people, the report is enough for school, but in some cases, if you're looking at things like funding access, there might be additional paperwork that we need to fill out. So at that point, parents can also let us know if there's any documents they need us to complete to help support an application for funding support.
Okay, perfect. So just a couple more questions, and these are more like questions that we typically get from parents or from people that are having assessments done. So one thing is how to explain the process to a child, because it can seem kind of scary. And if you tell a child they're going to see a doctor, I know a lot of the time they expect getting needles at our office, which is not accurate. But yeah, it's just how would you suggest that people explain the whole process to a child?
So often we'll recommend using the child's own words. So usually by the time people are looking at an assessment, kids are aware of what they're struggling with. So whether it be reading or attention or difficulty with their peers, they're usually expressing to parents that they're struggling, either if they're more sadness or they're anxious about things or they're just really frustrated. So we usually recommend using their own language back to them. So remember when you mentioned like you were having trouble or you're feeling really left out and you're not really sure why, or that reading homework you've been doing, you've been getting really frustrated, or you feel like you're listening in class, but people are telling you that you're not paying attention or you're not working hard enough. So using their own frustrations and saying, you've expressed that you're really having a challenge in this area, and we want to figure out how to make this easier for you. So using their experience can be useful because then it makes sense to them why, and it's also validating their experience and just explaining that this is supposed to make their life easier and that's why we're doing it.
Okay, perfect. So one last question is just, is the outcome of this going to limit them from being successful in the future?
Yeah, so that's often a common concern from parents is if they do meet criteria for some kind of diagnosis, whether it be learning or attention or something else. The fear that this identification is going to hinder them in some way or that their challenges are going to stop them from achieving their goals or being successful. And this is not true at all. So often it's not uncommon for students to have the biggest difficulty in these areas in the school age time, so elementary school, high school. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of flexibility at this age. You have to be in school for a set amount of time. You have to sit at a desk for a certain amount of time. You're taking courses that are required despite your interest level in some cases. And this tends to be less of an issue over time. So towards the end of high school, students get a lot more choice. They're picking things that they're interested in. They naturally will self-select into a skill area. And especially as they go into the college university time, they're picking something they're going to be doing as a career, so something they're motivated to do, something they're interested in, something they're good at. They're going to be surrounded by peers who have similar interests. So the impact tends to be less and less over time. It's not to say that their challenges won't affect them in those careers, but the motivation, their skill will compensate in a lot of ways. And people don't have to pick a job that they're not good at. So you can pick a job that you're interested in. You can pick careers that are on a topic you're related to that minimize the impact of your challenges. So someone with attention issues might not want to sit at a desk all day and be staring at a computer screen. They might want something more dynamic where they're talking to people and they're able to change what they're doing day to day. So there's ways to be successful in careers that we're going to minimize the impact as an adult. And that's something that's going to improve over time.
Okay, perfect. I think that was all the questions that we had. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sarah. That was very helpful. I'm sure it'll be great for a lot of people who are questioning where to get started with assessments.
Yeah, it can be a daunting process, but it's really helpful. And I find for a lot of people, having some type of information about why they're struggling and some guidance on how to overcome that is really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much again to Sarah Mackrell for joining us today. If anyone would like more information on assessments within our office, please feel free to call us at 613-599-7709 or visit our website at www.capitalpsychological.com. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.